They're a generation of angry young Muslim men.
You can go to any youth on the street and say, do you believe in jihad? They say, yeah. Do you believe that Al-Qaeda are a terrorist movement? They say, no.
We're living at a time of war because the Western world's not letting anyone live in peace.
And on Christmas Day, one young extremist tried to turn his radical anger into terrifying violence. Umar Abdul Muttalib from Nigeria boarded a plane to Detroit with high explosives concealed in his underwear. Just 23 years old, Abdul Muttalib is the latest young Muslim to have attempted mass murder. He spent 3 years at London University. For this series, I've worked for a year investigating who these young people are and how they come to be radicalized.
Generation Jihad is smart, well-educated, living in places like Bradford, West Yorkshire, Glasgow.
I've tracked their networks around the world. It's a world where teenagers are being recruited via the internet and groomed for violent jihad. In Britain, the government has developed a controversial multi-million-pound strategy to prevent the spread of violent Islamist extremism. That's because, although they're a tiny minority, a small group of radicalised young men now constitute the single biggest threat to our national security. My journey began in West Yorkshire, home to 2 million people, also home to 3 of the 7/7 bombers who attacked London in July 2005. I wanted to find out why some of Britain's young extremists are prepared to support violence against their fellow citizens. Yorkshire is a proud place, I know, because that's where I come from too. Bradford, Leeds, Huddersfield, Halifax, Dewsbury, cities and towns still rich in their industrial heritage. Over the years, thousands of Pakistani families have also been proud to put down their roots here and make parts of these old mill towns their own. But recently, this area has come under intense scrutiny from police forces and intelligence services, not just from the UK, but from around the world. That's because West Yorkshire has become home to a generation of young jihadis, and to Britain's youngest convicted terrorist. The terraced streets of Savile Town, a small community on the southern edge of Dewsbury, are home to 5,000 people. It's a largely Asian area, unremarkable in almost every way.
Savile Town is a very, very tight community. Everything that you do, everything that you say does get back to other people. If you're doing anything wrong, or if you're doing something great, if you've just graduated, if you get married, everybody knows your business.
Hamad Munshi went to Westborough High School, the local comprehensive. His classmates and family in Savile Town thought they knew Hamad well, an ordinary schoolboy studying for his GCSEs.
Well, Hamad was a normal boy, and the reason why I say this is because you'd never hear anything about him. The fact that nobody ever talked about Hamad, it's proof in itself that the lad himself was a good little boy who did listen to his parents and generally stayed out of trouble.
But from the age of 15, Hamad had been living a secret life. While his parents thought he was studying in his bedroom, he was logging on to extremist websites and chat rooms. He soon became radicalized and vulnerable to grooming by hardened jihadis. His private writings show how far he had gone.
The reason I have gone so early into this house of war is because of the beautiful act of fighting in putting Allah's word high above all. I do not want to stay in this country of disbelief. Please pray for me that I get martyred in a state of true faith.
Within months, he was wired into a serious jihadi cell. Without his parents knowing, he met a Bradford man who was one of the key figures in the network that was planning terrorist attacks in Europe and North America. But police had some of the group under surveillance. One summer afternoon, as Munshi was walking home from school, the police moved in.
His house is now being searched by police, investigating an alleged terrorist plot.
When I first heard about the house being raided, I was at home watching the news. This is when I first saw this, and I didn't believe it. I mean, there's just no way that this was happening to this family. When I did approach the street, when I did approach the house, there were a lot of people stood there. Everybody was just confused as to what was going on.
In his rucksack, the schoolboy was carrying 2 bags of ball bearings, similar to those used in suicide bombs. Police then searched his room. What was the evidence against Hamad Munshi? What did you find?
We found obviously the document on how to make napalm, which he'd created and shared. There was a number of pieces of information. One of them was how to make your own firearm, how to make your own submachine gun.
The teenager's arrest sent Savile Town into a state of shock. The Munshi family are well regarded here. Hamad's father and grandfather are both moderate imams who command great respect and authority in the community.
Maulana Yaqub, the grandfather, was very much, in a sense, liberal. I mean, you used to get a lot of people saying, oh, well, you have to do this, you have to do that. With Maulana Yaqub, it was a case of, well, why are you doing it? Understanding behind it, so when you did do it, you knew why you were doing what you were doing.
Where the TV is,
Community policeman Mohammed Aziz never saw Munshi as a potential terrorist, far from it.
Whenever they wanted to do work.
I've known the family for a very long time whilst working in Dewsbury. I've known the grandfather, the uncles of Munshi. A very educated family and a very understanding family as well. From my information, this young lad's been radicalised by a group.
Hamad was definitely radicalised. I mean, look at him, he's 15 years old, he's a young kid. Hamad was groomed and it was done intentionally. They knew exactly what they were doing with Hamad.
We met the Munshi family several times while researching this programme, but they declined to be interviewed on camera. They said they and Hamad had suffered enough. The shock was still raw. Did Hamad Munshi's family have any idea what he was doing on the internet?
From what we spoke to them, no, they had no idea at all. Again, it's that warning, isn't it, about the internet and parents.
Teenagers isolate themselves, they go lock themselves in their rooms and they're on their little phone gadgets or they're on their internet. They're doing their own thing. And whilst mummy downstairs has got the big Indian channel on with watching her favourite Bollywood dances, oblivious to what her children are actually getting up to. And I think that we need to actually, that is a real issue in the Pakistani home.
Hamad probably wanted to be a big man. Hamad probably wanted to, get attention from other people to see, well, look, this is what it's like. This is the frustration. If you guys aren't going to do anything, then I'm definitely going to do something. He wanted people to see what was going on, and he wanted people to stand up, wake up, and notice what is going on in the world and how we're so isolated from his warped truth.
Hamad Munshi was found guilty of possessing information likely to be useful to terrorists. He was sentenced to 2 years, making him, at 18, Britain's youngest convicted terrorist. And Munshi wasn't the only young jihadi who was stopped before an attack. MI5 reckons there are around 2,000 extremists in the UK who pose a potential threat, plus an unknown number of sympathisers. One of those sympathisers was Umar Abdul Muttalib, who tried to blow up a plane over Detroit. As a schoolboy in Nigeria, he had, just like Hamad Munshi, discovered extreme Islam and posted his jihadi fantasies on the internet. His radicalisation grew during his 3 years at University College London. But just what drives these young men to extremism? It's exceptionally difficult to talk to those who've fallen foul of Britain's anti-terror laws. They often view the media as the enemy. But we did find two who were prepared to speak to a Muslim colleague. Rizwan Ditta was born and bred in Halifax. Like Hamad Munshi, he discovered radical Islam in his teens. He's one of the angry voices of Generation Jihad.
You can go to any youth on the street and say, do you believe in jihad? They say yes. Do you believe that Al-Qaeda are a terrorist movement? They say no.
Last year, Ditta was released from prison after being sentenced to 4 years for terrorism offences similar to Munshi's. He's now out on licence with strict conditions.
I can't leave the address that I'm registered to be at between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I had to dedicate a mosque that I'll be going to regularly on Fridays, just so they know where I am. And then at the same time, that mosque that I attend, they put cameras in there. And the Imam was approached and he was spoken to, and my case was shown to the Imam, and they go, this is the guy and he's going to attend your mosque, and that kind of thing.
Bilal Muhammad is Rizwan Ditta's friend. He too was born and bred in Halifax.
We come from a small town, from a small neighbourhood, so to be honest, everyone knows everyone. We go to the same mosque and that kind of thing, and I knew when he started practicing and all that, so I got to know him really well, and he was a very close friend, and I was a very close friend of the families.
Muhammad had a market stall selling DVDs and videos about Islam. Some of them extended into the more extreme political aspects of his faith.
The political section I had on my stall was the truth, and I wanted to promote that, to let the wider audience know, because I do believe the general person living in the West is brainwashed by the media.
Muhammad's politics would probably be unpalatable to many of us.
We're living at a time of war because the Western world's not letting anyone live in peace. It's the West who are at war with everyone. It's the West who started this war. If this country had to be attacked tomorrow by your neighbours or anyone else, it'd only be natural for you to defend this country. So why is it always different when Muslims get attacked? It seemed as terrorism.
Like his friend Rizwan Ditta, Bilal Muhammad has also been charged under Britain's anti-terror laws. He has the dubious distinction of being the first person to be sentenced under the new and contentious offence of glorifying terrorism. He served 2 years in prison.
I was the first, I don't think I'm going to be the last. I mean, I think this law just quietens every single Muslim up, where they can't express or feel their views. That's the thing that they want to remove from the people's hearts and minds, and that's the thing that want to stop people knowing from.
I see it as a generation that have grown up, that are now conscious of who they are, they've learned their identity, and basically they've recognised the state of the Muslims globally, and they want to do something about it. So it's not a case of Generation Jihad, it's a generation of Muslims who are woken up. Everything in life it links back to Islam, from the way I dress to the way I deal with my family, everything. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Even now, as I'm sat in the barber to get my beard trim, I'm only going to trim it to a certain length because I can't trim it fully off. It's a practice of our blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, to keep the beard as a Muslim. It's part of our identity, and that's what we do. Islam has its own Sharia, it has its own rules and laws, and it has its own way of how we conduct ourselves, whether it's in marriage, whether it's in business, economics, social, judicial, everything. Islam has an answer and solution for everything.
But most British Muslims have a far less literal interpretation of Islam.
There seems to be a very small number of people that are bought into this bizarre cult that to be a Muslim, you've got to follow the kind of societal, cultural protocols of 6th century Arabia. Yeah, now, I mean, what does that actually mean? Yeah, in terms of, it means you can't engage with the 21st century.
So how did these divisions in British Islam arise? Rizwan Ditter's background is no different from the majority of British Muslims.
My family originated from Pakistan, but the origins and the story, just like many other people, came here in the 70s, economic migrants, and just been doing the same thing ever since, working hard, establishing life here and raising us. I haven't come from an affluent background, but at the same time, I never was, I've never been a victim of, you could say, poverty or any kind of, family breakup or any problems like that. I never had anything like that.
Ditter's father arrived in Britain in 1969, part of the last big wave of Pakistani immigrants who were arriving in the 50s and 60s. He went to work in Nestlé's chocolate factory in York. Like most new arrivals from Pakistan, Ditter's family were Barelvis, followers of a moderate school of Islam. Most of these immigrants had great pride in maintaining their Pakistani culture, a reminder of the land and traditions they'd left behind. Their religion was just part of that. Women covered their heads, but only with a thin veil like the custom back home. The men were usually clean-shaven and wore Western clothes. There was no hint of radical Islam.
Us Pakistanis, we've had a lot from this country. My dad came from an uneducated, very rural, deprived background, and he was raised as an orphan. He was a great businessman. In fact, he was so highly regarded in Bradford that he was sorting everybody's mortgages out, and he had a branch of a building society which was iconic.
Most were prepared to live happily alongside mainstream British culture. By the early 80s, Rizwan Ditter was attending primary school in Halifax.
The schools were predominantly white, they're predominantly English children. And then slowly, bit by bit, you had more and more Asian students there. So when I first went to my secondary school, it was predominantly white. Friends were mixed. Friends were whether Asian or English.
Bilal Muhammad started school in Halifax a couple of years later. By then, attitudes had begun to change.
Growing up was quite tough. Back in the 80s, there was quite a lot of racism. Primary school wasn't too bad, but growing up, going out to the local areas would sometimes get quite tough because there used to be a lot of pubs and bars around the place. Just going out there and they'll be like, you packy, that kind of stuff.
Racism against British Asians became endemic in many parts of the country. Most suffered in silence. But in the late 80s, a landmark event changed the way many young Muslims came to regard themselves. The first seeds of Generation Jihad were about to be sown. In 1988, the novelist Salman Rushdie published The Satanic Verses.
He's a devil, the true devil himself come to life.
The one thing that gave our parents comfort in the face of all the hostility of the NF and, the rest of it, the Quran, the scriptures, the holy book, their faith, which they practiced very privately, was suddenly seen as being under attack. And many people thought, right, enough, we're not having this anymore.
To Muslims, the book was blasphemous and insulted the Prophet Muhammad. Years of frustration exploded. At the time, I reported on the aftermath of the protests, and I remember being struck by its potential long-term consequences.
To most Muslims, the Rushdie affair is more than just a storm in a bookshop. They feel slighted by the government's inaction and see their community drawing even more tightly into itself.
Previously moderate Muslims cheered as Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini, who epitomised a different and more hardline school of Islam, issued a death sentence, a fatwa. Rushdie had to be killed.
We think that until he is dead, we won't leave him.
Alias Kermani, a Bradford youth worker, has watched the rise of Generation Jihad across West Yorkshire.
Was the Rushdie affair a turning point for many Muslims, besides yourself, do you think?
It was a significant milestone, I think, in the history of Muslims in Britain, definitely. And from that, you had a lot of activism. Obviously, some of that activism was channeled into jihadist groups.
From that, you had a whole raft of individuals who, through the whole Rushdie incident, actually re-examined their faith. And through re-examining their faith, they actually became much more observant. You could almost see it as an event which pushed people towards asserting that actually my Islamic identity is much more important than other parts of my identity.
The anti-racist movement, the anti-Nazi League, Rock Against Racism, they didn't enter the space of satanic verses, but a religious leadership clearly did. And maybe if we had had people of the calibre of leaders that are now coming through now, things would have been handled slightly differently, voices would have been moderated.
In this vacuum, religion rather than race increasingly became the political focus for many British Pakistanis.
I started practicing Islam roughly back in 1995. I was still at school at that point, sixth form. And it wasn't anything major or anything drastic. It was just a realization of being a Muslim and what Islam requires me to do as a Muslim. So I was always somebody who used to think a lot, and I was someone who used to contemplate. And Islam for me was just a natural step to start learning about my religion.
In the early 90s, events abroad began to make the younger generation increasingly aware of their Muslim identity.
Investigators have discovered the remains of half a dozen people. They're thought to be some of the 5,000 Muslims missing and presumed dead.
I used to hear about Bosnia. I didn't know anything about it, wasn't too consciously aware of it, but I knew it was bad. These massacres taking place and all that kind of thing. And when I started practicing in 95, I was in Srebrenica, the infamous event happened there. So slowly through that, you start becoming more politically aware, you start finding out what's going on.
Around the same time, Bilal Muhammad was living the life of most British teenagers.
Yeah, I used to enjoy listening to hip-hop, going out shopping, clubbing. I went off the rails in the sense I was not practicing my faith. I wasn't praying, I wasn't doing the obligations that I'm recommended to do. I was like the average teenager out there.
Muhammad wasn't just listening to music, he was part of the Asian club scene. Praying 5 times a day wasn't part of it, but increasingly his friends were rediscovering their Islamic faith.
A lot of my friends, people who I knew that was in the music scene, who I grew up with as young kids, and they changed and they sorted their lives out. They wanted to come back to their faith, and I seen how it changed their life and how happy they were.
Neither boy's parents were likely to complain about their sons turning to religion.
It was something that my parents thought, well, maybe now he'll study, because he's become more Islamic, maybe he'll tighten up on that. But Islam just made me question it even more.
So Mum and Dad might be delighted. Oh, he's hanging around with a nice bunch of Muslim boys. And so that's enough for them. That, okay, he's not on the streets with the gangs taking skunk and going out with girls, but what he's doing is going to the mosque, that's it. And so maybe that's enough for them.
But what attracted some of the younger generation to Islam was not the moderate faith of their parents, but an extreme brand whose roots lay in Arab countries far from Pakistan. For angry young Muslim boys, traditional imams at the local mosques could not compete with fanatical voices calling for holy war against the infidels.
If it's killing, do it! If it's paying, pay! You help your brothers, you help Islam!
In many ways, the issues that young Muslims have are no different to other young people in society. So, for example, young white working class men who feel, again, disempowered, disenfranchised in society, okay, might manifest that through far-right extremism, through antisocial behaviour, maybe through binge drinking. Young Caribbean men, again, who have that same kind of anger and disaffection might manifest that through gun crime or gang behaviour or knife crime. And young, angry Muslim men, okay, feel that they have a justifiable cause and might latch onto far-right Muslim extremism as well.
At 17, Rizwan Ditta was attracted to the new radical groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir and Al-Muhajirun.
I used to attend talks and lectures and seminars, number of many groups and movements. I would never partisan to one alone. They give me my political understanding, which I really need to develop on what's going on, because they were the only ones that was talking about what's going on globally, and they were giving you a solution.
They should be aware what it means to be Muslim in this God-forsaken country. We have been born.
These political groups talked of building an Islamic state or caliphate, uniting the entire Muslim world under medieval Sharia law.
At the time when we heard it, we thought, Khilafah, what is this? Islamic State? Where's this come from? You know, where's the Islamic State? Is it in Pakistan? You know, is it in China? You know, is it in Bangladesh? You didn't understand what it was. Is it Saudi? Saudi Islamic State?
But what the Islamist extremist wanted was a worldwide Islamic state, and events in the Middle East acted as a powerful recruiter to the cause. In September 2000, 12-year-old Mohammed al-Dura was shot dead by Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip. The moment was seared on Rizwan Ditta's mind.
Mohammed al-Durra is a blatant example. That was just like, if you can't see what's happening now, then you might as well go back to sleep, or you're living in zombie land, because this is blatant for you to see, where a father's protecting his son and he's telling him to back off, and you're now seeing a sniper shooting blatantly at him. I know Mohammed al-Durra is getting shot every day. There's Mohammed al-Durras all over the place. Just one got caught on camera.
As with so many other things, Generation Jihad sees the conflict in black and white, ignoring alternative versions of such events and the atrocities that Palestinian groups have inflicted on Israel. By 2001, Rizwan Ditta was employed at the headquarters of the Halifax Building Society. His friend Bilal Muhammad had left college and was working at a takeaway. For both of them, like for many British Muslims, Al-Qaeda's attacks on New York and Washington on 9/11 marked a critical turning point.
Obviously 2001 I think changed things for a lot of people, and it changed things for myself as well, because when you watched it on TV that day, I think everybody can remember the planes going into the building. You wanted to know, what is all this about? Why has this happened? There's a lot of questions that you had that you wanted to be answered. And obviously, because it was all directed to Muslims and Islam, that was a big change in my life.
After 2001 came the invasions of Afghanistan and then Iraq. In the UK, young men steeped in radical Islam simply saw fellow Muslims being killed by British and American soldiers, fueling their anger still more.
The suffering of a Muslim, whether it's in Palestine, Kashmir, or Iraq or Afghanistan, wherever it is, the same way I'd feel a pain if somebody attacked my own mother or my own father or my brother and sister. I've got heart.
As Muslims, we don't have loyalties to where we've been bought and bred. We have loyalties to Islam and the Muslims. That's where our priority and our loyalties lie. So I believe that my loyalties Even though I've been born and bred in England, my loyalties and priorities lie with the Muslims.
This is the concept of Ummah, the global community in which all Muslims are brothers and sisters. For jihadi sympathisers, it's used to justify almost any kind of violence in retaliation for the suffering of fellow Muslims. For moderate Muslims, such justification is a perversion of their faith.
Ummah is attractive for a number of reasons. They're connected in a way that they've never been able to connect with anyone ever before. They also feel a strong sense of identity. Well, this is who we are, this is what we're about. We have a voice, we have a dress code, we have a certain set of ways that, set of rules and guidelines in which we carry ourselves on a day-to-day basis.
There are elements in the Quran, just like there's elements in the Torah, and just like there's elements in the Old Testament that are about conflict, that can be used to justify racial supremacy, cultural supremacy. There's chapters and elements in the Torah about racial supremacy of one race over another. There's things in the Old Testament that are not exactly a John Lennon record.
What we have from the seven heavens is the Quran, the word of God, the actual word of God, revealed to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Relying on the literal word of the Quran is the trademark of radical Muslim groups like Al-Muhajirun. It was banned in 2006. Some of the extremist preachers associated with it were thrown out of Britain. It then changed its name to Islam for UK. That too has recently been banned. It caused outrage by staging stunts involving British soldiers returning from Afghanistan.
By asking him to come into your life.
Abu Raya from East London joined 4 years ago and was seen as one of the group's leading voices.
You can't prove to me the Bible is the word of God, but we can prove to you the Quran here. Yeah, in Peckham we can prove to you that the Quran is the word of God. If radical means supporting your Muslim brothers, if radical means attending Islamic talks and learning about Islam, which is obligation on every single Muslim, if you mean radical, then yes, I become radical. Allahu Akbar.
This group had a tiny membership. Its core message was rejected by the vast majority of Britain's Muslims.
The British people, they are solely responsible for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. They are responsible for 7/7 and they are responsible indirectly for 9/11 because they are the people who voted these people in. They were happy with occupying Muslim land. And if you throw a brick at someone's house, you would expect a brick back at you. You know what I mean?
Such views could be dismissed as the wild fantasies of a lunatic fringe, but they still excited powerful emotions.
Take this out of our country. Calm down, calm down. I'm asking you, right?
You start swearing.
Yeah, calm down. Go back to Islam, right? Preach your own Muslim. Yeah, well, go back over there, preach your own stuff over there, right? I was born in this country.
But the uncomfortable truth is that almost every British Muslim convicted of terrorism offences has at one time been influenced by groups like this.
You know what I mean?
I find it really difficult to talk about Al-Muhajirun in the context of them being Muslims, okay? They're fascists, yeah? They're fascists, they're exploitative, they are no different, okay, than the BNP or the English Defence League. Yeah, and I think it is incredibly, incredibly dangerous to give them the credence, yeah, of them being Muslims.
Radicalism, however offensive, isn't the same as terrorism. So what turns an angry young man into a potential murderer? The young of Generation Jihad often share a similar profile: isolated, empty, and lacking a purpose in life. Umar Abdul Muttalib, who tried to bomb a plane over Detroit on Christmas Day, reveals such emotions when he posted them as a schoolboy on the internet.
I feel depressed and lonely. I do not know what to do. I imagine how the great jihad will take place, how the Muslims will win and rule the whole world.
Where Abdul Muttalib failed, Jamal Lindsay succeeded. Lindsay was one of the 4 young Muslims who bombed London on 7/7. In the years before the attacks, he displayed many of the weaknesses and family problems on which radicalisers and recruiters prey. Lindsay was born in Jamaica and never knew his father. His mother, Mariam, brought him to live in Huddersfield, where she converted to Islam. At the age of 15, Lindsay converted too.
When I met him at the age of 16, he was alone, and really the Muslim community was his family. And we were a family, I think, who were very supportive, and I think whilst he was with us for, the time that he was in our community, felt that his needs were being met, felt that he had the emotional support, the physical support, the practical support, was being instructed correctly in terms of his understanding of Islam.
Converts tend to sort of gravitate towards each other, and so we tend to sort of say, oh, hi, kind of thing.
Will Valler, another convert to Islam, got to know Lindsay through a mosque in Leeds.
What was he like? How did Jamal Lindsay strike you at that time?
He seemed very friendly, pleasant, asking how people were, smiling, seemed quite a calm person, to be honest.
But Lindsay was a damaged young man with deep grievances, and it was his mother Mariam who inadvertently set her son on the road that ended so tragically.
2 weeks after their conversion, Mariam took Jamal to a mosque to hear a lecture by Sheikh Abdullah Al Faisal. She says that he was probably attracted to Faisal because he was black and he came from Jamaica. That's probably how Jamal's radicalization began.
So how do you fight the Hindus? You have to bomb the Indian businesses. And as for the Jews, you kill them physically. Then you will overcome them in Kashmir and in Palestine.
As well as knowing Lindsay, Alias Kamani has met and interviewed many young Muslims convicted under terrorism legislation. Lindsay's family history was not unusual.
9 out of 10 young men that I work with, when I ask them a question, a standard question, tell me about the relationship with your father. And most of them will tell me, well, I don't really have much of a relationship with my father. Yes, I respect him, but I don't really have an open relationship with him in terms of I can express my feelings. So as a result of that, an individual has a gap in their life in terms of who is my role model, who is, and almost, I suppose, a search for a father figure. And in particular, a compassionate senior male role model. Sometimes extremist recruiters actually play that particular role.
The person who hates kufr, hates the infidels, and he wants to meet his Lord, the person who carries out this operation, from the first drop of his blood, all his sins are forgiven.
Sheikh Faisal Abdullah seems to have become the role model for Jamal Lindsay, who by 2001 was a teenager living alone in Huddersfield. Abu Osama is another controversial imam who once studied with Sheikh Faisal in Saudi Arabia before Faisal came to Britain.
He was a quiet, reserved, soft-spoken individual, but when he came to this country, the one-eyed man is a giant in the land of the blind, and he became the monster that he became a few years ago. Many of the younger Arabs and Asians who grew up in this country, they also relate to people like Faisal because they had a time in their life when they were not necessarily Muslims or practicing Islam. They were in the streets. They were engaged in narcotics. They were engaged in the nightlife. So to see a person like Faisal coming from that background as well and then getting himself together, so to speak, and becoming a Muslim, I think that also causes there to be a sense of camaraderie.
It's thought that it was in Sheikh Faisal's study groups that Lindsay first met Mohammed Sadiq Khan, the leader of the cell that went on to bomb London. Gradually, Lindsay began to withdraw from the mainstream Muslim community in West Yorkshire.
He goes off the radar. He disappears for a period of time. We have a whole range of vulnerabilities and insecurities. We've got people who, can unless they find someone who can channel them down a very positive way, who can intervene in their life and give them a sense of purpose and guidance and can show them the right way, are really prone to a whole range of are prone to that kind of extremism, radicalisation that we're talking about.
In 2005, Lindsay reappeared, but his old friends barely recognised him.
But I didn't know who the hell this guy was. Almost, who are you? And then when I sort of peered a bit closer, I was kind of glad there was this gate here. I realised it was Jamal.
But he looked very different from the way he looked when you first met him.
Yeah, he had a hoodie, sort of shaven eyebrows. Like I say, the best way to describe him when he was sort of gangster rapper.
Lindsay had shaved off the beard he'd grown and never trimmed since he was 15. He'd completely changed his appearance. To avoid attention, all the 7/7 bombers transformed their appearance in the months leading up to the attack.
The last time Mariam says she spoke to Jamal was on the phone from America 2 days before 7/7. She says that he didn't seem his normal, happy, cheerful self. He seemed preoccupied, as if he was planning something.
I'd got the paper and it said the fourth bomber had been identified, and opened the paper and great big sort of 2-page spread photograph of Jamal's face. And at first I just couldn't believe it. I was so shocked.
Why do you think Jamal Lindsay, whom you knew well and were close to, why do you think he did what he did?
I think I can't understand it. I really don't understand it. It really baffles me completely. And when I saw his picture flash up on the news, I just couldn't understand it. And there was an aspect of, how did I let this happen? There was an aspect of, how did this happen? And what did I do? Did I make a mistake in terms of maybe I didn't support this individual well enough that he slipped through the net?
Did you feel guilty?
I did. I can really say that I did all that I could to support that individual whilst the 2 years that I knew him. And, outside of that, it wasn't really in my control. And there's lots of factors which we're all responsible for.
The country was united in grief, a grief shared by the vast majority of Muslims who felt outrage and disbelief at the actions of the bombers who came from within their community.
I felt shocked and disgusted with what had happened. And to this day, my sympathies lie with the families of those people who've lost their loved ones. Because Islam doesn't condone any of that. Not in my eyes at all. And not in God's eyes either. Not in Islam.
But for the radicalised youth of Generation Jihad, mourning the victims of the London bombings exclusively does not seem appropriate.
I think it's irresponsible because, first of all, it's an insult to those who were bombed yesterday or the day before or over the past couple of decades in the other lands. You've ignored them. We've had a minute's silence for everyone here in the West, but you've ignored everyone else. I see that as an insult.
While Ditta denies supporting the murder of innocent civilians, he appears to have some sympathy with the Al-Qaeda cause.
The people that died, they were civilians, they weren't soldiers. Isn't there a difference?
The argument that's being used from the other side, basically, is that when you have occupation of the Muslim lands in particular, because that's what we're looking at here, when you have constant bombardment and you have like the police forces and basically the security is leashed upon a nation and a people, they're now going to redefine their understanding of innocent civilians. And that's what you get Osama bin Laden in his videos and his messages to Al Jazeera and this general news network saying that this war is no longer confined to these lands. We will chase you back, we will do stuff in your land, we will send people, we will penetrate your security. So from that angle, you can see how justified they are in their argument.
Ditta's interest in the arguments and propaganda put out by Al-Qaeda was about to land him in serious trouble. Following the London bombings, the security services began to target suspected supporters of Islamist terrorism. Britain has some of the toughest anti-terror laws in the world, and the police began to use them.
Bang at the door, police are knocking. I went and answered it. Now, obviously, nothing suspicious, so there's no reason for me to run and wake the family up or run around the house or try to run out the back door. I'm not doing anything, I've never done anything. They grabbed me, took me to the corner of the kitchen. Police officer, the first thing he said to me, he goes, "You don't look shocked." He goes, "You don't look shocked." And I go, "Why would I look shocked for?" I go, "This is happening all over the UK. It's a matter of time before it knocks on my door."
The police searched his house from top to bottom. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Ditta was self-radicalised via the internet, and just like many others from Generation Jihad, had downloaded extremist videos and DVDs to form an extensive jihadi library. To the police, this was potentially vital evidence.
They took obviously more CDs, computers, videotapes, family videotapes, documentaries, anything you can think of they took.
At the same time, police raided the home of Ditta's friend Bilal Muhammad. His brother and family were deeply shocked.
Going back to the day you got arrested, it was such a shock. Yeah. Scotland Yard police, I can remember when I was in bed, all I heard is some bloke shouting, "Stop, don't move, Scotland Yard." I thought I was dreaming.
Yeah.
It was more of a nightmare, to be honest.
Yeah.
Woke up and we got told, all of us, remember we all went into that room,
Yeah.
didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Mum, Dad were crying.
Another series of raids, another community in shock. Anti-terror police today returned to West Yorkshire.
Probably the hardest thing was when we put the news on, 9 o'clock, and you're there on the news.
Going on the way down, the radio was on, and they had the breaking news, and the breaking news it was 2 men have been arrested from Halifax. And I just turned around, looked at the officer, and I said, 2 men, because I knew obviously I was one of them. And they quickly switched the radio off, and they said, "Look, we cannot answer any question you ask us now. And we'll talk, we'll have the interview when we get to the police station in Paddington."
Before I arrived at the police station, they told me that we know who you are and what you're about. So there's no point hiding it, and there's no point not cooperating with us. So speak openly, speak frankly. When we get to the police station, tell us everything, because we know everything about you. I was giggling. I was laughing at the time, and they go, "It's not funny. What we're saying is serious." I go, "Yeah, but it's so preposterous, I don't know how to react."
One of the things that the intelligence services had discovered was that Ditta had visited Pakistan in 2005 and 2006. They suspected he might have been planning a bombing campaign in Britain. He was confronted by this during his interrogation.
Are you a terrorist? Were you sent back? Who sent you back? And at that point you're thinking, well, how am I supposed to answer this? Because none of these questions even make sense. We're not accusing you of training, or we're not saying you actually did come back to the UK with the intention of suicide bombing, but that's the picture we have. We think you went to Pakistan with the intention of not coming back, but somebody sent you back, and you were going to then carry out a bombing campaign basically in the UK. You were the next 7/7.
This is some of the footage that was found on Ditta's hard drive. Police found hundreds of images that have been downloaded from the internet. Scenes of suffering and war in Chechnya, Bosnia, Palestine, Afghanistan and Iraq.
The content I'm talking about here, not to shock anyone, is stuff that you can view on YouTube. It is stuff that is widely available on the internet. It's nothing shocking. It's stuff like you saw IEDs exploding. You saw stuff of American soldiers being blown up in Iraq. And then you saw the other side too. You saw the Americans committing atrocities. You saw things like that. Just videos like that, just hundreds of videos like that, all compiled onto one hard drive.
The prosecutors asked an independent terrorism expert to look at the videos found on Ditta and Muhammad's computers.
They are the main group of Generation Jihad, the people who are out there who spend all this time collecting and assimilating propaganda from Al-Qaeda, and who are riding right on the line between activity that is defended by freedom of speech and certainly legitimate research activity to going and putting these ideas into action.
Bilal Muhammad was selling these radical DVDs as he did the rounds of markets in the north.
I don't believe I really had anything that was radical.
Considering that there might be like really young people that buy the stuff, do you think it was responsible?
I mean, it was like a full documentary. It wasn't all the way from beginning to the end like this. It was tell what's going on in the West, what the West are doing, what the West are saying, and at the same time it'll show the war-torn country in the lands of Afghanistan or Iraq. So it was all compiled together. It wasn't done just one person speaking all the way through it. You had two sides of the stories to it.
But there was one video that caused particular concern. It was found hidden in a padlocked cupboard in Ditter's room. It features an American jihadi, 31-year-old Adam Gadan, a member of Al-Qaeda.
It's a defensive war by brave, defiant Muslims of all races and nationalities against a murderous infidel aggressor.
Although Ditter denies it, according to Evan Coleman, this video is only available directly from Al-Qaeda and is not available on the internet.
They marched right up to the line where you could say they engaged in behavior that was no longer searching for information and really going into the level of a criminal conspiracy, and they danced all over that line. They engaged in behavior which in every other case comes just short of where you have an imminent threat.
I believe I may be naive, and maybe I was, somebody who, like they're saying it, curiosity, and we know what that did to the cat. You know, but in my case, didn't kill it, but they ended up in prison.
In November 2007, Ditter was released after serving 2 years of a 4-year sentence for possessing information likely to be of use to terrorists. Even though he pleaded guilty, he insists that simply owning video footage does not make him a terrorist.
I don't have a clue. If you showed me any form of firearm, I couldn't clean it, I couldn't load it, I couldn't fix it if it locked up with you. I couldn't do anything to it. But yet, they classify me as a terrorist. Why? Because not only is it a case of firearms and weaponry, it's about ideas and thoughts. And once when you become too loud and you challenge the ideas and thoughts, that's when it becomes problematic for you.
Ditter received his 4-year sentence not for what he thought, but for what he possessed. Is there a danger that these new anti-terror laws give impetus to radicalisation?
Certainly the anti-terror laws have kind of reinforced that idea of a siege mentality, that we are being really picked on as a community, that this set of laws disproportionately targets our community, i.e. the Muslim community. And then it reinforces that part of your identity. And you become more insular as a community as well, because you recognise there isn't any space in the mainstream for you.
The reason why the Muslim community feels itself being targeted is because in the process of identifying the albeit small number of potential bombers, potential terrorists, the community as a whole is being watched, is being monitored, is being singled out.
I do accept the perception that you've put into me. I do accept that. We are very sensitive to the way we carry out our operations in relation to the prevention of terrorism, and are very careful to judge retrospectively how our operations have been carried out and how they've been perceived by the community. I'd like to say in West Yorkshire that for the most part the communities have viewed very positively the way that we've gone about our operations.
Bilal Muhammad also pleaded guilty and got 2 years, but he claims that many in his community believe it's wrong to brand him as a terrorist. As a result, he says he's been welcomed back with open arms.
I've lived in this community for 28 years now. I have a good relationship with the general community, especially with the Muslim community. And none of the Muslim community see me as a terrorist, to be honest with you. They all received me very good. I mean, I had flowers brought to my house. I mean, I couldn't sit with my immediate family alone for a good part of almost 3 months because of the amount of visitors we had coming back and forth, bringing me presents, money, obviously giving me support and comfort and saying everything's all right, don't worry, you didn't do anything.
But the risk that supporters of extremist Islam will turn into terrorists is real. Abdul Muttalib's failed attack confirms the potential tragedy that one young man can unleash, and he's unlikely to be the last. the police and security services cannot afford to take their eyes off Generation Jihad. A generation that is totally alienated from the values of their parents, and even more alienated from the values of wider British society. All too often we don't engage with them, and the intense targeting by the police and intelligence services only increases the anger of those who are vulnerable to radicalisation. Now, this targeting is understandable given the serious nature of the threat we face, but the danger is that we create even greater resentment that may only end in further attacks. My investigation into the roots of radicalisation began with the story of Hamad Munshi from West Yorkshire, released from prison last May. Police felt that, aged 16, Munshi was on the brink of graduating from being a supporter of terrorism to becoming an active participant. But how is a 16-year-old on a computer turned into a potential bomber? Munshi was unlucky enough to come into internet contact with this man, Abid Hussain Khan from Bradford. How was Hamad Munshi recruited?
He got into these social networking sites, he got talking to like-minded people, and Khan had access to those through his social networking site, Actibian Publications. Munshi got involved into that, and obviously his thoughts were changed. His thought processes were changed, and he became involved with extremists.
To his friends and family in Bradford, Abid Khan was a normal youngster, working in a burger bar at weekends to earn a few pounds.
He used to like football, cricket, played football in school, for the school team. He's a reasonable footballer. He used to like cricket. He used to support Manchester United.
Is your son a terrorist?
No, he's not a terrorist, but you couldn't kill a fly, right?
We're not talking about killing flies.
He's not a terrorist, he's my son, right?
But Khan had a clandestine existence, running a jihadi social networking website that actively targeted young Muslims.
They're invited to join, and then they're subjected to a very singularly minded view that Al-Qaeda put out.
So Abid Khan was a sort of Al-Qaeda predator.
Yeah, he would be that sort of equivalent to, you know, a predator on the website, gets young people trapped into it.
Hamad Munshi wasn't the only young Muslim being drawn into Abid Khan's web. Khan was a key figure in a network that went way beyond West Yorkshire and even beyond Europe. Next week, I investigate how Generation Jihad has spread via the internet across the world, and how Khan and his associates plan to carry out devastating terrorist attacks across North America.